I never thought one Monday morning could feel like the longest day of my life. But there I was, standing in the lobby of the office, my heels clicking nervously on the marble floor, heart racing like it wanted to escape my chest. I had prepared for this day for weeks. My presentation was polished, every slide carefully planned, every statistic double-checked. I knew my material inside out, and yet, a tiny voice in my head whispered doubts, the kind that gnaw at you when you know you're about to face someone who never believed in you. His office door loomed ahead, sleek and intimidating. My manager, the person who should have been guiding me, had somehow made it his personal mission to make me feel small. And today I had to face him in front of the whole team. I tried to take a deep breath, tried to remind myself that I was capable, that I had earned my place here. But my palms were sweating, and I felt that familiar knot of tension coil in my stomach. I had always been ambitious. From the moment I joined this company, I worked hard, stayed late, volunteered for challenging projects, and tried to prove myself quietly. Yet somehow it never seemed enough. He had a way of dismissing my efforts, a casual arrogance that could cut deeper than any harsh words. He didn't just doubt me. He seemed to take pleasure in reminding everyone else that he didn't think I was competent enough. As I walked into the conference room, I noticed the way he looked at me. That smirk, that smug confidence, as if he already knew I was about to stumble. My colleagues gave me polite smiles, some trying to encourage me, but I could feel their tension too. They all knew what this man was capable of in moments like these. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My manager didn't respond immediately. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes narrowing, as if he were silently judging every word I would say. That was his power, his game, to make you doubt yourself before you even started. And today he was ready to play it to the fullest. I began my presentation, my voice slightly shaking at first but growing steadier as I went on. The slides were perfect, my data was strong, my ideas innovative. I could see some nods of approval from my team. And then it happened, the moment that would stick in my mind like a scar for weeks. He interrupted me, not with a question or a critique, but with a laugh. A sharp, cruel laugh that echoed in the room. "Really?" he said, leaning back in his chair. "You spent weeks on this, and this is what you came up with?" His tone dripped with condescension. Every word landed like a punch. My face burned, my stomach flipped. The confidence I had carefully built over the past few minutes evaporated instantly. I froze. My mind raced for words, for a response, but nothing came out. The room went quiet, the silence almost heavier than his laughter. He looked around, seeing the reactions of our colleagues, some of whom tried to stifle their giggles, others looking uncomfortable. And then he pointed at me. "Maybe this isn't the role for you," he said casually, as if announcing the weather. I wanted to disappear. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. Every humiliating memory from my time here came rushing back. The overlooked emails, the ignored suggestions, the times I stayed late fixing mistakes no one noticed. All of it culminated in this one moment of public humiliation. And yet, in the midst of that shame, a spark ignited. I realized something crucial. This was his power over me, yes, but only because I allowed it. I could feel anger bubbling beneath the surface, but it wasn't the kind of anger that makes you lash out recklessly. It was sharp, cold, and calculating. The kind of anger that doesn't scream, it plans. And I knew right then that I would not let this define me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as best as I could, and forced a polite smile. "Thank you for your feedback," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'll review it and make improvements." He raised an eyebrow, probably expecting me to crumble further, but I didn't. I walked out of the conference room with my head held high, even though inside I was boiling. That walk back to my desk was surreal. My hands were still trembling, and my mind replayed every humiliating detail on loop. But at the same time, there was a clarity I hadn't felt before. I realized that I couldn't control him, or how he treated me, but I could control what I did next. I could turn this embarrassment into a weapon, a tool to prove not just to him but to myself that I was capable of far more than he would ever give me credit for. I sat at my desk, opening my laptop with deliberate calm. Emails, reports, data. Everything became a battlefield. I would work smarter, not harder. I would observe, plan, and execute in a way that would leave him no room to dismiss me. And I made a silent vow. When this was over, the tables would turn. He wouldn't just see me as competent. He would see me as unstoppable. That day, I learned something about resilience. Humiliation can feel like a dagger, but it can also light a fire. And as I watched him move around the office, oblivious to the storm brewing quietly behind my calm exterior, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. He thought he had won, but he didn't know that he had just awakened something in me that no laugh, no sneer, no insult could ever suppress again. And so began my journey, not of revenge in the petty sense, but of proving my worth, of showing that no one can define you by their ignorance or arrogance. Every glance I received from him after that day, every subtle smirk or dismissive remark, only fueled my determination. I was no longer the employee he could mock without consequence. I was a strategist, a planner, a woman who had learned that humiliation was not the end. It was the beginning of a very satisfying story yet to unfold. Little did he know, the next time he saw me, I would no longer be the timid employee in heels trying not to shake with fear. I would be the force he never expected, the storm he didn't see coming. And the best part? He would never know how close he came to pushing me into greatness. The day after the humiliation, I walked into the office carrying my usual calm exterior, but inside my mind was a whirlwind. I felt a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and an unstoppable drive that I hadn't felt before. My colleagues avoided eye contact, some giving polite smiles, others pretending nothing had happened. But I knew they had seen it too. The moment my manager mocked me, belittled me in front of everyone, and made me feel smaller than I had ever felt. I sat at my desk staring at my laptop, letting the events of yesterday replay over and over in my mind. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply felt focused. The humiliation, instead of breaking me, had sharpened my instincts. I knew that if I wanted to turn the tables, I couldn't react impulsively. I had to plan carefully, strategically, and without letting anyone, especially him, know what I was up to. The rest of the day was torturous. Every time I saw him laughing at a joke, or giving someone else a pat on the back, I felt that sting of being overlooked. And yet, a part of me started to analyze everything he did. His strengths, his weaknesses, the patterns in his behavior. He was arrogant, yes, but predictable. That predictability would become my greatest weapon. By mid-afternoon, I had a rough mental plan. I would start small, earning credibility silently, without letting him know what I was doing. Every email I sent, every minor task I completed would have an extra layer of excellence. No mistakes, no sloppy work. I wasn't just going to impress my manager. I was going to create undeniable evidence that I was indispensable. I started by revisiting the project that had led to yesterday's humiliation. I combed through every number, every slide, every report, looking for ways to improve, to make it flawless. I cross-checked my data, added insights no one had thought of, and created alternative solutions to every problem. While he had laughed at my original work, I now envisioned a version so polished, so clever, that it would leave him speechless. Even as I worked late into the evening, my mind wasn't just on the project, it was on him. I remembered every slight, every dismissive comment, every time he had undermined me. And I promised myself that none of it would go unanswered. Not with confrontation, not with bitterness, but with undeniable proof of my abilities. My revenge wouldn't be loud or messy. It would be precise, calculated, and public. At home, I spent hours researching, reading articles, watching tutorials, and learning tools I had never used before. Every new skill, every insight was a piece of armor. He had underestimated me, dismissed me as weak and replaceable, and I realized that the best comeback would be to outsmart him at every step. I was learning faster, planning better, and building a silent momentum he couldn't see coming. The following week, I implemented small victories that my manager didn't notice, but my colleagues did. I solved problems he had ignored, corrected errors he hadn't bothered to catch, and suggested ideas that quietly impressed other team members. Each action was subtle, almost invisible, but each one was a brick in the foundation of my eventual triumph. One day, he walked past my desk smirking and said, "Still trying to prove yourself?" His tone was mocking, but I smiled politely. "Just making sure everything runs smoothly," I replied. Inside, I was thrilled. He had no idea how close he was to being outshone. The tiny seeds of doubt he had planted in my mind were now growing in him. He didn't realize that while he focused on belittling me, I was becoming unstoppable. As the days passed, I noticed a subtle shift in the office dynamic. Colleagues who had previously ignored my ideas started asking for my input. Clients who had been indifferent to my emails now responded with appreciation. Every small success, every positive note was building my credibility. And yet, I didn't brag, didn't make a single boast. Everything was deliberate, quiet, invisible, like a storm gathering strength in silence. The most important part of this section of my story was learning patience. Revenge, I realized, isn't about instant gratification. It's about timing, precision, and impact. I didn't need to humiliate him back in the moment. That would have been satisfying for a second but meaningless in the grand scheme. The real triumph would be to rise above, to shine so brightly that he could no longer deny my worth. I also spent time observing his weaknesses more closely. He was impulsive, often distracted by ego, and relied heavily on routine. He liked attention, craved approval from upper management, and underestimated anyone he considered quiet. These observations became invaluable. Each task I completed, each client I impressed, and each project I improved was carefully planned to hit the areas he neglected, making my contributions undeniable. By the end of the second week, I had built an entire framework for my comeback. I had improved the project he had mocked, created additional reports, suggested innovative ideas, and quietly positioned myself as someone who couldn't be ignored. And though I hadn't confronted him yet, I could already sense his growing irritation. He had started noticing the small changes, how clients responded to me, how colleagues began consulting me for advice, and how my work suddenly had an impact he couldn't deny. It was thrilling in a strange way to see the shift happening without a single word exchanged. My manager still tried to maintain control, but his influence was slipping almost imperceptibly. And that was the beauty of the plan. Revenge, I had realized, doesn't have to be loud. It can be subtle, strategic, and devastatingly effective when executed with patience and intelligence. By the end of this week, I sat at my desk, reflecting on how far I had come. I was no longer just the embarrassed employee from yesterday. I had transformed into someone who could quietly command respect, someone who could turn humiliation into strategy, and someone who was now building the foundation for the moment when I would finally take the spotlight he had tried to steal from me. And in that moment, I felt a powerful truth. Humiliation can either break you or ignite you. For me, it had ignited a fire that no mocking words could extinguish. He had underestimated me, belittled me, and laughed at me, but every action I took after that moment was carefully designed to prove one thing. I was stronger, smarter, and far more capable than he ever imagined. The journey had only just begun, but I could feel the momentum shifting. The storm was gathering quietly, invisibly, and the day of my full comeback was inching closer. I had turned my anger and humiliation into a weapon, and it was precise, patient, and unstoppable. And the best part? He still had no idea what was coming. After the second week, I realized something important. Small victories were satisfying, but they weren't enough. If I wanted to truly reclaim my dignity and teach my manager a lesson he wouldn't forget, I had to take control of the situation completely. The humiliation I had endured had planted a seed of determination, but now it was time to let it grow into something powerful, something unstoppable. I started observing the office differently. Every interaction, every email, every casual conversation became a piece of intelligence I could use. My manager had routines, habits, and blind spots that he never noticed in himself. He assumed that people like me, quiet, diligent, and careful, would never challenge him. That assumption was my greatest advantage. While he focused on immediate recognition and praise from the higher-ups, I quietly mapped out the landscape of power in the office, noting who had influence, who could help, and who could be impressed with subtle strategies. Late at night, long after everyone else had gone home, I would sit at my desk with a cup of cold coffee and plan. I didn't just want to succeed at the next project. I wanted to craft a sequence of events so perfect that when the moment arrived, it would be impossible for him to dismiss my accomplishments. Every step had to be calculated. I created spreadsheets to track my progress, timelines to manage key deliverables, and even practiced potential presentations in front of my mirror at home. It almost felt like I was preparing for a secret mission, a mission in which every action could tip the balance in my favor. I also knew that information was power. The more I understood about the projects, clients, and even my manager's weaknesses, the stronger my position would be. I began digging into past reports, analyzing what had gone wrong in previous meetings, and identifying opportunities he had overlooked. Each discovery fueled my confidence. While he was busy underestimating me, I was quietly becoming indispensable. One evening, I came across a major flaw in a report my manager had submitted to upper management a month ago. It was subtle, something most people would have ignored, but I noticed it immediately. I fixed it, prepared a corrected version, and sent it directly to the client without alerting him. The client responded the next morning, praising the accuracy and timeliness of the report. I could almost hear his smug grin faltering from across the office. He didn't realize that I had just stepped one level ahead of him, silently, without confrontation or drama. But it wasn't just about proving him wrong, it was about building credibility with the people who truly mattered. I started taking initiative in meetings, offering solutions that no one had considered, quietly gathering allies who began to notice my competence. My manager, still blinded by ego, didn't see it coming. Every compliment I received from colleagues or clients was a quiet triumph, a step toward the day when my full comeback would unfold. At home, I transformed my living room into a war room of ideas. Whiteboards, sticky notes, spreadsheets, and sketches covered every available surface. I tracked every project, every opportunity, and every potential way to shine. It was exhausting work, but it thrilled me. For the first time, I felt completely in control of my destiny. Every late night, every extra hour I spent planning, was a brick in the foundation of my eventual triumph. That I also realized that part of my strategy had to involve patience and timing. Immediate revenge or confrontation would have been satisfying in the short term, but it wouldn't have had the impact I wanted. My plan had to be invisible until it reached critical mass, a point where my manager's underestimation would collapse in front of everyone. That knowledge made every small victory sweeter, because I knew it was all part of a bigger picture he couldn't yet see. As I worked on these plans, I began to reflect on the qualities that had been dismissed. My intelligence, my problem-solving skills, my dedication, all traits he had mocked or ignored. And I realized that true power wasn't about yelling, arguing, or seeking immediate recognition. It was about strategy, execution, and timing. I began to see him not as a tyrant, but as a predictable obstacle, a challenge that I could outsmart with patience and planning. I started keeping a private log of every incident, every small slight, every sarcastic comment he made. Not out of bitterness, but as a way to track his behavior patterns. I noticed that he thrived on attention, was impulsive when challenged, and often overlooked details that didn't fit his ego. These observations became weapons. Every report I prepared, every client email I sent, every project I completed, was designed to exploit those blind spots without him ever realizing it. During this period, I also worked on refining my skills beyond the office. I took online courses, attended webinars, and studied case studies relevant to my projects. I became an expert in areas he considered minor or unimportant. While he focused on appearances and quick wins, I was developing expertise that would make my contributions undeniable. It felt like building a secret arsenal, one that I would deploy when the moment was right. And then came the real test. A sudden client issue that everyone assumed was impossible to solve. My manager was about to dismiss it as a lost cause, leaving the problem unresolved. But I saw an opportunity. I spent the evening analyzing the situation, contacting the right people, and developing a solution that no one had considered. The next morning, I presented it to the client and they were amazed. The client praised my initiative, my thoroughness, and my ability to think outside the box. Across the office, I noticed my manager's subtle reaction, surprise, followed by irritation. He was beginning to see that I was no longer just the employee he could mock and dismiss. But he still didn't understand the depth of my planning, the precision of my moves, or the momentum I had quietly built. By the end of the third week, I had transformed. I was no longer the timid, embarrassed employee from Section 1. I had become a strategist, a quiet force in the office, and someone who could execute flawlessly while remaining invisible to those who underestimated me. Every small victory, every unnoticed effort, had been part of a larger plan. A plan that was now ready to reach its tipping point. I often caught myself smiling quietly, thinking about the moment when all of my careful planning would converge. The humiliation I had endured had fueled a transformation I hadn't anticipated. I felt empowered, unstoppable, and in complete control of my destiny. The storm was building quietly, invisibly, and soon, it would hit with a force my manager could never have imagined. And so as I left the office each night, I felt a thrill unlike anything I had ever experienced. Every step, every action, every late night of secret planning was a step closer to vindication. I knew that when the moment came, he would not just be surprised. He would be stunned, realizing that the quiet, underestimated employee he humiliated had been plotting a comeback so precise, so brilliant, that there was no way to ignore it. The excitement of the unseen journey, the power of silent preparation, and the certainty that my time had finally come gave me a sense of control I had never known before. I had turned humiliation into strategy, embarrassment into motivation, and mockery into fuel. And though no one else yet knew what I was capable of, I did. I was ready, patient, and unstoppable to be why the fourth week. Something in the office had shifted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't announced. But I could feel it in the silence when I spoke, in the way people suddenly listened. The same people who once watched me get humiliated were now watching me differently. Carefully. Curiously. My manager felt it too, even if he pretended not to. He still walked around with confidence, still cracked jokes, still acted like he owned the room. But I noticed the cracks. The way his eyes followed conversations he wasn't part of. The way he checked emails twice. The way control slowly slipped from his grip. The real shift began on a Tuesday morning. A major client called with an urgent issue. One that could cost the company serious money if handled poorly. My manager glanced at it, laughed, and said it wasn't worth fixing on short notice. He moved on like it didn't matter. I stayed quiet. That night I stayed late. Long after the office lights dimmed, I sat alone, reviewing data everyone else ignored. Patterns emerged. Mistakes became clear. And somewhere between exhaustion and focus, the solution appeared. It wasn't dramatic. It was smart. I emailed the client calmly, professionally. No ego. No noise. By morning the reply arrived. They were impressed. Grateful. They wanted a follow-up meeting. I watched my manager read that email. His smile froze. He reread it. Slowly. Something shifted behind his eyes. During the team meeting, he tried to stay in control. Talked loudly. Skipped my name. But when the client issue came up, all eyes turned to me. So I spoke. Calm. Clear. Confident. I explained the solution. The results. No accusations. No drama. Just facts. The room leaned in. Heads nodded. And for the first time, my manager had nothing to say. That wasn't the comeback yet. It was the warning. The real moment came on Friday. Upper management. Senior leadership. A room full of people who decided careers. My manager walked in confident, assuming the spotlight was his. He didn't see me as a threat. He still thought I was the same woman he had laughed at weeks ago. He was wrong. When it was my turn, the room went quiet. I didn't rush. I didn't apologize. I didn't ask for permission. I presented. Every slide told a story of preparation, foresight, leadership. I addressed problems before questions were asked. I offered solutions others hadn't considered. This wasn't just work. It was strategy. My manager tried to interrupt. Once. Twice. I answered calmly, clearly, with evidence. Each response took something from him: authority, confidence, control. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Then applause. Not polite. Real. I looked at him. He couldn't meet my eyes. The man who once laughed at me now sat still, exposed, not because I attacked him, but because excellence left him nowhere to hide. After the meeting, people congratulated me quietly, respectfully. My manager walked past without a word. That evening, I sat at my desk and finally breathed. I thought about the humiliation, the laughter, the moment I almost broke. And I realized something powerful. Humiliation didn't end me. It refined me. I learned patience, strategy, timing. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be loud to be devastating. Sometimes the strongest response is success so undeniable it rewrites the story. In the weeks that followed, the office changed. People came to me for input. Leadership noticed. And my manager, he never mocked me again. Not because I demanded respect, but because I earned it. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. When someone tries to humiliate you, don't rush to respond. Let them underestimate you. Let them laugh. Then rise so high that their laughter turns into silence. My name is Sophia. And that was the moment my comeback shocked him.